Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Or if it's your first time, welcome to my channel. My name is Marlene and I talk about eating disorder recovery and everything related to healing the relationship with your own body, with food and with movement. And today we're going to talk about the question if EDs are always genetic and what other reasons can lead to developing an ED. As you guys know, I'm a recovery coach and I had an eating disorder for 10 years, which I recovered from. And now I'm doing content about this topic to help other people who are going through recovery. As to the question if EDs are genetic, yes and no. We know now from over 50 years of research that there is definitely a genetical predisposition in some people, but that doesn't mean that everyone who has this genetical predisposition automatically develops an eating disorder. And it also doesn't mean that you have to have this genetical predisposition in order to develop an eating disorder. So let's dive into what that gene is, how they found out, and also what other reasons lead to having an eating disorder. If we look at historical times, we have to understand that we as human beings are, evolutionarily spoken, meant to survive. Our bodies have a lot of mechanisms to survive, which is, a lot of those we actually see in recovery. And when it comes to the genetical predisposition, there was actually a reason for that. If we look at herds back in the days, and let's say there was a herd of any kind of animal, it doesn't always exist in humans, by the way. There were a lot of very interesting studies in pigs and rats and other animals. And let's say there's a herd of this group of animals and there's a famine going on. Those who carry that gene will most likely start to starve themselves if there's a famine going on, meaning this gene can be set off by starvation, set off by undereating, which then leads to the animal to restrict even more. The reason for that is actually very simple. The reason is if there's a famine going on and part of the group stops eating, there will automatically more food available for the other part of the group. That is the whole point. Now, of course, times changed and we live in completely different times now, yet this gene still exists. In some people, it gets set off by dieting, which is why a lot of people think that diets lead to eating disorders, which actually can be true, but it doesn't have to be true. That is actually one of the reasons why sometimes we see two different people doing a diet, and one of them can easily stop and go back to normal eating habits again, while the other person completely loses control and slips into an eating disorder. That is something that can have to do with the genetic predisposition, but of course there's a bunch of other reasons for that too. For a lot of people with trauma or certain experiences, eating disorders can be a coping mechanism, whether it is to suppress your emotions, whether it is something else to focus on, whether it is a form of self-harm, because yes, EDs are actually forms of self-harm, even though we sometimes might not want to see this, but this can be another reason to develop an ED. For a lot of people, focusing on an ED, which we all know can be very time-consuming, and just like living life up to those ED standards, can be a way to forget about other things. It can be a way to, fill your time without having to think about your trauma. But of course, it's not always that easy, especially with trauma, which can be super, super complex. There's still a lot of research going on, and unfortunately, we still are looking for a lot of answers in the field. But we know now that a lot of people with trauma actually have a way lower self-esteem, which is something that can actually feed into mental illnesses. Eating disorder oftentimes come along with other mental illnesses, but of course not always. We oftentimes see anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, and a lot of other mental health issues in combination with eating disorders. But again, that doesn't always have to be the truth. I work with clients all the time, and I did work with many, many clients who actually didn't have any other mental health issues except their eating disorder. Because we also live in diet culture, and diet culture makes us believe that certain ways are not only healthy but also achievable, are also the main way to live your life, that you have to look a certain way, that you're not worthy if you're way more, or if you're not working out all the time. And so that can definitely have an impact on our neural pathways and on the way we see the world. Oftentimes we think that eating disorders have to have this big, big root, which of course can be the truth for many folks, but it's not necessarily always the case. Eating disorders are so complex, and especially in a world where, again, we learn that being skinny is the number one thing, that working out all the time is so important. And just a little side note, everyone who's promoting that is making money on that. The main reason why companies are selling us light or zero sugar products, the main reason why everyone is so obsessed with a skinny, fit body is not because it's actual healthy. It is because companies make a bunch of money on that. Diet culture is one of the biggest industries in the world. There's billions of dollars made every year worldwide. And it is just something that makes us believe we have to live this lifestyle when actually it is just a way to make money. Now, when I say it is not healthy, I mean that health is very individual. There are definitely people who have naturally skinny bodies, and I'm not saying that is unhealthy, but there's also people in bigger bodies that can be just as healthy. In fact, we've seen in a bunch of studies now that people whose body are supposed to be a bigger size, once they start dieting all the time or just like going under their set point weight, their bodies will actually not function as well anymore as at a higher weight. So these are things that we don't talk about enough, because then we couldn't sell our protein powders and our weight loss drugs anymore. But this is just a little side note. When we talk about the questions if diets lead to eating disorders, it is important to understand that there is so much that comes together. As I said in the beginning of this video, yes, one reason can be the genetical predisposition, where when somebody starts under eating, it can be very, very hard to get back to normal eating because the gene gets set up and the person actually starts to eat less and less and less. And oftentimes we see simultaneously an increase in the movement. That can have to do with a lot of hormones, for instance, cortisol and other stress hormones that play a big role, because when you're under eating, it is always stress for your body. And therefore, your body will have the urge to move. There is actually a very, very important and interesting study, the flee to famine hypothesis, and it is actually an explanation for this urge to move. Because when we look back at ancient times and we look back at our herd that we talked about before, and there was a famine, it would be deadly to just stop moving. Therefore, if there's a famine and once the body doesn't get enough nutrients anymore, those stress hormones will raise so that your body will continue to move, that you are able to go somewhere where there's more food available. So evolutionary spoken, that is really smart. But when it comes to eating disorders, that can be really tricky, because so many people have the strong urge to move. And I remember when I had an ED, I was actually convinced that this urge to move was only there because it would allow me to burn calories and therefore to eat a little bit more. And yes, in my mind, that was how it worked. In my mind, that was why I was doing it. But what I didn't know was that there was way more going on in my body, from my brain and the way it was wired due to my eating disorders, to like the hormones that were set off because I was in a malnourished state. So yes, when people with eating disorders have the strong urge to move, it is probably very closely connected to the eating disorder, but not only to burn calories, but also because their body has a biological response to the famine. And of course, another thing that can play a big reason when it comes to developing eating disorders is the ways you grew up. So for instance, if you grew up in a family where there was a lot of diet talk, a lot of health foods, chances are that you learned from an early age that certain foods are better or worse, that certain foods are unhealthy and healthy, good and bad, and that can have a big impact on your relationship with your own body and with food. Another thing is if, for instance, let's say you're a girl or you identify as a girl, and your mother, your sister, your grandmother, every female person in your family was constantly talking poorly about their body, chances are that you will have a way more negative way to look at your own body. Studies have also shown that not eating together can also have an impact on a person's relationship with food and therewith with their body. And an interesting thing is we oftentimes assume that the body image issues comes first and then the eating disorder follows, which for a lot of people can be the case. But we've also seen it the other way around. For some people, issues with food come first, and then the body image issues develop. And of course, there's also eating disorders or people with eating disorders who actually don't really struggle with their body image. I really want to point that out because it's so individual, and I'm not saying that everyone who has an ED struggles with a body image, but in that particular topic, it can actually happen both ways. And that is one of the reasons why it is so important to attack recovery from a holistic standpoint. And what I mean by that is to not only focus on renourishment, but to also not only focus on, talking about the underlying issues. That was one mistake that I made for so many years because I didn't want to recover, but I wanted to want to recover. I don't know if that makes sense, but part of me wanted to recover, but I didn't have this overall motivation for myself. And so I went from therapist to therapist and hoped that they would give me the one reason, or that we would work through my childhood for the 100th time, or that we would talk about my traumas for the 50th time, and therefore I will finally want to recover. And that just didn't happen for me because I had to step into action. Now, at the same time, once I started to eat and once I stopped to compulsively move all the time, I thought, oh, now it's going to get so much better because I'm making those changes. I will finally start to eat again, so I will feel so much happier. But actually the opposite was the case, and I was getting really depressed. So I'm just telling that to show you that it oftentimes is really important to look at both sides, your mental state and your physical state. It is important to eat. You won't think yourself out of an eating disorder. You can have all the knowledge, you can read all the books, you can listen to every podcast, and you can watch every single one of my videos. But if you're not starting to make changes, you will not recover. At the same time, for many folks, if you only focus on eating without doing any mental work, without doing any belief rewiring, it can also be the case that you won't feel like you're fully recovered because there's still a lot of beliefs that you have to work on. So as you can see, eating disorders have so many different layers, so many different reasons, so many different roots. And while it can be super helpful to know a little bit more about them, I'm a science geek. I love to read studies. I love to understand more about it because it can also help in my work as a coach. But at the same time, you can read as much as you want to, and you can have as much knowledge as you want to. You have to start doing as well. If it feels overwhelming and if you don't know where to start, get some help. You are worthy of help. And whether it's a nutritionist, a therapist, a coach, or even a combination of all of these, it can be so powerful to work with somebody together. It is not a failure. They can hold you accountable. They can help you to take a look at the things that you might not see because the eating disorder is still kind of shadowing them. And it is just your chance to really take back control over your life, to not let the eating disorder win, because in the end, whether you have the genetical predisposition or not, whether you have trauma or not, eating disorder recovery is possible. I've seen people from all different backgrounds, with all different stories, with with years and decades or a month of eating disorder experiences. I've seen them recovering, and it is possible even if it feels impossible for you at the moment. I really hope this short video helped you guys. Let me know what you think about the studies. Let me know if you learned something new today. If you want to leave a like, that's super helpful for me. But most importantly, let me know in the comments if you have questions for me. I'm really here to help. I want you to know that you're not alone on this journey. And otherwise, I will see you in the next one.